Welcome to the West Ham Voice. It's a nice sunny day here in Cyprus, and thought I'd do another quick catch-up on the situation ongoing at West Ham with regards to a director of football, or the lack of one thereof. We're told that a couple of targets were approached and have turned down the chance to become directors of football or technical directors at West Ham. We haven't been given any names, and we don't really know whether the rumour of having approached certain individuals is true or not. But the transfer window opens on the 15th of June, and we really need to have a director of football in place before we do any transfer business, or I'm imagining that we do. Or are we going to face yet another situation where there isn't going to be a director of football and transfers happen in the same manner as they've happened before? Look, this could be another George Mendes inspired revolution at West Ham. He did it at Wolves with Nuno, where Nuno took over Wolverhampton Wanderers and at the first time of asking brought the team back up to the Premier League. But that was on the back of George Mendes bringing in some pretty decent talents to play for Wolverhampton Wanderers at the time. And at this moment in time, all the signs seem to be pretty similar, that we're not seeming to get a director of football, but Nuno is going to be the one alongside George Mendes to determine the squad for next season. Now, the other part of this story is that apparently Nuno is going to have some kind of say into who the director of football or who the technical director will be at West Ham. That's quite bizarre, given that it's the director of football who chooses, who appoints the manager or the coach of a football club. So that seems a little bit odd. But then nothing is ever done right at West Ham United. You know, the club, that's why we're in a mess. That's why we found ourselves to be in the situation that we have been. No long-term planning, and I'm sure you've heard the Mikel Antonio interview where he spoke about that, and if there's one thing I agree with, that element of it is right. I mean, unfortunately for Mikel Antonio, he burnt his bridges with a lot of West Ham fans by saying that after he was let go, he wished for the club to be relegated. And the sour grapes over the fact that he seemed to think that he was owed a much better contract after his car crash seemed to be a rather bizarre statement to make, to be quite honest with you. But look, George Mendes helped Nuno to create the squad that got Wolves out of the Championship. And, then they went riding high in the Premier League, don't forget. And I think they finished, correct me if I'm wrong, they finished in Europe as well. So it offered, under George Mendes and Nuno, Wolverhampton Wanderers, it offered a couple of years of stability, which I'm sure would be very most welcome at West Ham United. We need a couple of years of stability, but is that enough? But we know this system doesn't last long enough. When a manager is in charge of transfer business, when a team is built around the manager's guys rather than a club guys, the minute that manager leaves, everything around it collapses. It's gone, and it's not sustainable. So look, the other thing that worries me about Nuno sort of taking full control of transfer business and creating a squad in his own guise is that the brand of football that he delivers. Now, if you remember back, we were okay when David Moyes got us away from relegation, stabilised us, got us into Europe, etc. We were quite happy. But after 2 seasons of that, the third season began to be quite tough because the fans didn't want that style of football anymore. And I've got a fear that if Nuno has got more control over transfers, etc., him building the kind of brand of football that many suggest is the Portuguese version of David Moyes' football, then after a couple of seasons, next season we'll get back into the Premier League. That'll be fine. The fans will tolerate that. The following season, we stabilise, maybe pushing for a place in Europe. The fans will buy into that as well. But then the third season, the third year itch will come along where fans will expect and want more. And Nuno may not be the sort of manager that the fans will want for longevity. Which is why West Ham United, if they promise to have a director of football, really need to push ahead and do that. Because the director of football will actually give us that difference. It will give us an identity. It will give us a brand, a style of football that we can build on for not just 1, 2 or 3 seasons, but for many seasons to come. But look, I guess, like I said, we would accept Nuno and George Mendes developing a style of football for West Ham to get us back in the Premier League, to stabilise us for a while, maybe a season or 2. But then what? Us fans will ask for more. Nuno, with his, counter-attacking style of football, won't necessarily be able to deliver more. And that's where I think the problem lies. So are we looking at a cycle again of what we have experienced at West Ham over and over again? And the other thing with managers and who we appoint is another interesting thing in terms of who the owners want. Now, I'm not buying into this whole Kretinsky has come in to save the day, his influence has, made sure that Nuno stays, etc. I think it was a unanimous decision to go with Nuno. And it's probably got more David Sullivan written all over it than it has Daniel Kretinsky, and I'll try to explain why. Because we've had two managers in the Sullivan era who have both stabilised the club. They both got us into decent positions in the league, but their brand of football has been poor, to say the least. Not the West Ham way. And those two managers were Sam Allardyce and David Moyes. Now, both very similar in their approaches, defensive-minded, really didn't give a damn about the so-called West Ham way. But those two managers, it was all about results. It was all about getting results on the board rather than the style of football that we were playing. Nuno is pretty much the same. He is, as fans have called him out throughout last season, very much defensive-minded. And he was criticised for that. He didn't care much about possession of football, although our possession was pretty good. Didn't much care for possession of football. It was all about the counter-attack and trying to get points in that way. So David Sullivan is risk-averse. We know this. When Sam Allardyce was at the club, he was loath to get rid of him, but under fan pressure, he decided, a change was good. And then, of course, everything happened. Then we got Bilic. First season was great. The second season was poor. We got Moyes to save us. And then he did the dirty on Moyes and decided to go for Pellegrini. And that didn't work out. And then Moyes came back. And just like Allardyce, Sullivan was a little bit loath to get rid of David Moyes. He would rather he'd stayed, and we all know about the contract that was offered. But this is where Sullivan falls apart a little bit with his strategy or lack of, because he then got Steiden involved, and Moyes' capacity to build a squad, to deal with transfers, etc., was diminished. And this is another fear. I don't know where we're going with the whole director of football and Nuno approach, because we know Nuno doesn't want to necessarily work with a director of football. He'd much rather be in control alongside George Mendes in determining the squad. Look, for the immediacy of it, I've got no problem with it. The immediacy of it is fine. If Nuno alongside George Mendes gets us a really strong squad, probably Portuguese, Spanish-based, and we go up, we're not gonna argue, in terms of what the fan base think. And then, like I said, the next season, we stabilise, we push for Europe. The fans won't argue then, but it's the third season that's the problem, and that's where I fear. And this is why we need to find out. Are we going to get a director of football? are we not? Because if we're not going to get a director of football, let's come out with it. Let's say no, the strategy has changed. This is what we're going to do. You know, George Mendes and Nuno are going to be the catalyst for building a new squad, getting us back up, and that's what we'll do. Say that'll be the strategy for the next 2 or 3 years, and we'll accept that. But then have a longer term strategy. But if we are going to get a director of football, this guy needs to come in by the end of this week. There's rumour that we will get a director of football by the end of this week. If that's the case, then great. Then at least he can hit the ground running on the 15th of June when the transfer window opens, and we can start building the squad, and we're going to start knowing who's going to go and so on and so forth. But it's a little bit confused at the moment, and it's very, very much like West Ham to be very confused when it comes to strategies, long-term strategies, short-term strategies. As Mikel Antonio said, we only sort of strategise for, the year ahead rather than long-term. And at the moment, it's beginning to feel that it's very much the same as before. That there's no long-term strategy in place. It's just the short-termism, which has got, again, David Sullivan written all over it. So to summarise, we don't have a director of football yet. There's a suggestion that Nuno will be allowed to build a squad with his mate George Mendes, develop a squad which will get us back into the Premier League, will probably stabilise us next season in the Premier League. But what after? What then? What happens after that? Because if we don't get a director of football now, I don't think we ever will. Here's an opportunity. It's a bit of a clean slate as such to really go for it, really put in place a proper long-term strategy. But if we don't get a director of football by the end of this week, I'm not sure that we will. But let's be proven wrong, shall we? Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And yes, I'm still out in Cyprus and it's beautiful out here. And I'll see you all again soon.